Welcome to the next edition of the IoT Leaders podcast with me, your host, Nick Earle, the CEO of SI. And I'm delighted on this podcast to have my guest, Dimitrios Spiliopoulos. And Dimitrios is from AWS, Amazon Web Services. He's the Senior IoT Specialist for EMEA for AWS. So Dimitrios, welcome to the IoT Leaders podcast.
Thank you very much, Nick, for the invitation and for having me here today. I'm very keen to discuss with you. Thanks again.
You're very welcome, as am I. Now, Dimitrios, and as you will know, and hopefully some of the listeners know, AWS and SI do have a history together in the IoT space. We've been partners for, I would say just coming up to 5 years, I think, and we have a lot of mutual customers, and we've learned a lot of things together in that time. And I'm sure we'll cover a few of those things in the brief time that we've got here. But just for the moment, maybe you could just explain what does your role involve? What does a senior IoT specialist for EMEA involve at AWS?
Yeah, it involves many things. It is more around the business development for the IoT business. I belong in the IoT Worldwide Specialist Organization of AWS, where we help, as specialists, we're helping customers with their digital transformation projects where IoT is involved. But also we're helping our colleagues internally, like account managers and other colleagues to understand better IoT, but also help their customers. So it has an element of enablement internally, but also dealing with the customers outside and trying to understand, get feedback from what are the needs, what are the trends, and feedback the service team that they build the IoT services for AWS. And in general, I'm focusing more on scaling activities, trying to scale the adoption of IoT in general, where is my passion, but also the adoption of AWS IoT managed services.
Yeah, and I mentioned that we've been working together as two companies for about 5 years. One of the reasons that we thought that AWS would be, a couple of reasons really why we thought AWS would be successful in this space. First of all, just looking at the numbers, we talked about 80% of the data is going to be at the edge as the number of devices grows exponentially at the edge, and of course AWS really makes money by capturing data, by giving insight, by adding value to data, and then with all the applications to manipulate the data. And so it's natural that AWS would follow, if you like, the data to the edge. But the second thing is, and I think this is really emerging from my perspective at least, second reason is the global nature of AWS. I mean, I've talked a lot on this podcast about our focus being global customers, global deployments, which is where multi-country, multi-regions, where a lot of issues often come up because of the fragmented proprietary nature of the mobile network marketplace and landscape. And of course, AWS being a inherently a global capability is something which gives lots of value to customers. So let's double click and go into what sort of issues do you must meet a lot of customers all the time, as you said. What sort of issues do your customers talk to you about? What are you finding are their biggest challenges?
Yeah, I think the type of challenges is changing, right, every year, because now I think IoT is becoming more mature. Many more companies are using IoT, or they are thinking very seriously. We're not like 3 or 5, 10 years ago that it was very like emerging technology. Now I think we are more going to the maturity. So I would start with the first challenge for the companies that they have already started their IoT journey, which is that they connected the product, they launched it in the market, they had some success, and now they are thinking, okay, what are we going to do more with IoT, with our already connected product? But also they are wondering what they will do with the version 2 of their product. and how they will be able to monetize the data they have, or how they are going to, they're thinking how they can have more data that can offer more value to their customers or create new services and maybe more revenues for their business. So customers are coming to us not only for the services, serverless, let's say IoT services, but they're coming also to listen from us how they can get value from their IoT data. And we have several ways that we try to help them. One is with some ideation workshops, and we try to use the Amazon innovation culture, the working backwards, as we say in Amazon, where we try to help the customer to think what they want to do, like to create a press release with what should be the final announcement of their product, and also give them the tools, let's say, to analyze their data. This is
That's
something
interesting. That's interesting that you do that. I didn't know you actually had formalized that process. I was reminded as you were saying it, almost like playing golf. You know, people say, you know, you play backwards from the hole. You know, how many shots. Start with the destination and work backwards. It's a common business technique. So you actually have formalized it. You're saying you almost like start off, write the press release or the marketing release, whatever, of what you want the success story to be, and then you've got a clear idea of what success looks like, and then work backwards, as opposed to start with some technology and work forward, solving a problem at a time.
exactly
where you go about it. That's interesting.
Exactly, yeah. Instead of starting with the technology, or let's do IoT, or let's use these AWS services and partners, we're saying, okay, this is the press release, what we would like to announce, and then we help the customer. And this is actually the methodology that Amazon and AWS use it for all these years. So we have make it as a workshop to help our customers, learn and practice this methodology.
So if you're going to do that, if presumably then that means that you get a selection of different people from the customer to come into some sort of ideation workshop. I mean, just the pure technology people, I wouldn't be enough, would it? I mean, because they would say, well, I don't know, I've just been asked to do a certain task, or I've got to solve this problem. Yeah. So you actually ask for a certain, I don't know, job titles or people, management as well as technical.
Definitely.
Stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point, because with traditional IT workloads, usually we had the relationship with IT people, right? CIOs. But now with IoT, I think and it's not only AWS, I'm sure you see it also, right, in your business. The discussion is not only with the IT or procurement, but mainly with the business development, with the innovation teams, many times with the CEO of the company, because we're speaking about transformation or innovation and changing processes, business models. So yeah, we try to invite even the CEO of the company, CFO, marketing people, sales, business development, and of course the tech team of the customer.
So okay, that's interesting. So I want to go back to a point that you said and skipped over, because I think it's very pertinent. One of the things, and that was this issue of, I think you used the phrase V2 of the product. And one of the reasons for doing this podcast, I've mentioned it before in previous ones and with previous guests, is that we didn't start off saying, oh, we want to be in the podcast business. We actually were finding that people really needed help and advice, and they wanted people to guide them through various steps. And you've just mentioned that, and the HEFO, the IoT Leaders podcast series came about, and you've just mentioned that because you said, well, version 1, they've got it to work, but but it's essentially in the bench in the office, it works, the prototype works, but having a prototype working and then going for a national or global rollout with all the different components and having to solve it, the connectivity, you mentioned the device, which I'm sure we'll come on to, which is a big issue, the data, capturing the data, what to do with the data. Is that also a common thing? After you've done the vision thing, I guess you're then in the process with the customer, and you seem to be saying that many customers get going, I guess, fairly quickly, but then where they really need help is scaling it to V2?
Yeah, or scaling even from the V1, because they may do a POC or prototype, but then they need to scale.
Yes. Yeah.
And yeah, we see customers that they're trying to do everything themselves, and sometimes it can take 1 or 2 years, but which is very long, right? Maybe your product is outdated after 2 years, your idea from 3
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we try always, exactly, yeah. We try to bring partners and always recommend to our customers to work closely with our partners in order to accelerate this journey. Plus, we also we have a prototyping team which is designed to help the customer start at the right way, or professional services. But yeah, we always try to give, the full support of the customer, especially through our partners, in order to not wait for a long time until make a production ready product and scale quickly. And then there are other things around security, right? Around the edge computing, how to do it at the right way, how to reduce the risks.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mentioned at the beginning of and we're going to get onto security in edge computing in a second, but let's pick three subjects to go a bit deeper in now. Let's go to the connectivity, the edge computing, and the security. If we start off with the connectivity, I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that we've been partnering for almost 5 years now. One of the areas that we partnered in was on the connectivity side. It's interesting what's happened since those early days, because we started off saying, we have the AnyNet SIM, which can connect to over 700 networks. So therefore, you can create a single SKU, a manufacturing SKU, like Bosch have a single SKU for a robotic lawnmower, sell it around the world in multiple countries. People take it home, buy it through retail, take it home, switch it on, and it works. But what's now happening is we're seeing that the telecoms market, and we talked about this in other podcasts as well, is fragmenting even more, in that roaming agreements are actually breaking down because of the financial model in roaming. There's just not enough money, particularly at the low end on narrowband, and so you're now getting an even more fragmented market. Features like power saving mode not available on many roaming agreements. Therefore, it's even more difficult to take that V1 and scale it, because now you have to think about all the different connectivity and all the different markets and all of this work. And that was the genesis of the relationship between us, that we say, well, with our SKU, we handle that and we localize the connection in each market. But you mentioned security. We also did some early work together with AWS on Device Defender. Security is a big issue for our customers. It must come up in every conversation that you have. What sort of questions and what sort of concerns and advice do people really? What are the concerns that they have, and what advice are they wanting from you in the area of security? Because it's such a broad topic for IoT.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we see customers coming to us, asking about the basic, like how to start with the security, how to do the basics right, how to do the access management properly, to not give access to everyone to their data lake or to their storage, to their data, or how to minimize the access to each person based on what they have to do at their job. So these are some basics which are not only for IoT, right? This classic IT security, but also about the encryption. Like all the AWS IoT services are encrypted by default. So this is something we always recommend the customers about the device ID, how to manage them at scale, and the key the device identities. Also, how to be able to know that your device is not compromised and it's not that it's coming the message or data from another source. So we try to help with all of this. Our solution architects, actually, for the specialist IoT, are getting in these discussions for security for the IoT core service. But this is, I think, is the basic security. As you mentioned, Device Defender, right? So this is the service that we always recommend the customers for extra security of their devices. This service is designed for IoT sensors. It's not for something else. It's designed only for connected devices. And I think the most interesting thing that maybe it's worth it to hear for the audience is that since December we launched a new feature at the Device Defender, which use machine learning in order to identify anomalies at the last 14 days, anomalies at the network, at the traffic, and at the behavior of the device. So it can send alerts and take mitigation actions. So I think Nick is more about now how we receive many questions, but we see that it's quite complicating sometimes, right, for customers to handle all of this.
Yeah.
So we try to simplify and automate kind of many of the processes. So no need to have a super cybersecurity expert in the team.
Just to develop. Exactly. And it's interesting that you talk about machine learning, because when I mentioned that the number of devices is growing exponentially at the edge, it is our belief as well as SI that the only way you can actually define and propagate and monitor security policies is to do it centrally and use techniques like machine learning to do sort of pattern recognition at the edge. When we're describing security to people, I say, look, it's hard for a lot of people to wrap their head around what that means. And we say, well, think of like the Nest thermostat. Look, a Nest thermostat, they say, is more intelligent than the human because it does pattern matching of what room. We're all creatures of habit. What room do we go in more often? It knows clearly it knows the temperature outside. It knows the forecast, but it also knows that you don't need the third bedroom heating on because you never go in there. And it can monitor you. But then if you apply that to tens, hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of devices, the idea of using machine learning to recognize patterns, and in this case, as you say, anomaly detection. So it's not that these things will magically stop any security breach, but the first thing is early recognition of unusual behavior. And because devices are devices of habit, if you like, and the earlier you can recognize unusual behavior, the quicker you can look at it. And it might be fine. You say, no, that's fine. There's something going on there. I'm okay with that. Or it might be not fine because time is so critical, isn't it? When there's any sort of security problem, one of the key issues is not reacting to it. It's the fact that by the time you spot it, often the damage is done.
More proactive, let's say, or at least identify it, right, at the real time that something is going wrong.
Yeah. And given that you guys also can issue security certificates, a security certificate issuing authority as a hyperscale cloud provider, you're in a great position to actually reissue the certificate and to help seal the device, if you like. And that our alliance was around taking that with Device Defender, which we helped launch with you. Seems like a long time ago now on stage in Chicago, but the ability to actually take the device across our network, which is also encrypted. Of course, we don't use the public internet. We only use encryption, private networking at all stages. And so it's network level security, which is very important. And the ability to then store the security certificates in the SIM with all the security keys is a key part of it. All of which brings us to the third subject, which is the hardware side. That's another big area as well. And the phrase that I'm hearing more and more is MEC, or mobile edge compute. We've all lived through this time when we thought that hardware wasn't important. Actually, I would say, due to the success of hyperscale cloud providers like AWS, it's like, well, I just need a browser. I know there's hardware, but I'm not managing it anymore. I'm just doing work. I'm just
Yeah.
programming. And so, phrases were thrown around like, software is eating hardware. It's all about the software. Even company valuations were very much geared towards software companies, not
Yeah.
hardware
Too many
companies.
startups raised.
And,
Yeah.
and then suddenly mobile edge compute arrived, and you mentioned the sensors, and suddenly now there is a very important piece of hardware at the edge, which is an aggregation point, which is now going to have to deal with certain sensors with unique business logic. In fact, the business case comes together at the edge. And suddenly you've got all these people who thought that they were going to do an IoT project, maybe buy an off-the-shelf device, like you buy a mobile phone from a phone shop, but actually it's not. I mean, our experience, we're a hardware company as well as a hardware design company, as well as a SaaS IoT company, consulting company. But I would say 90% of devices and projects that we get involved in require custom specific hardware. How are you finding your customers and prospects are wrapping their head around suddenly having to think about hardware when they have spent the last 10, 15 years thinking it's just all in the cloud and you don't have to do it anymore?
I mean, I think that it's not that they were not thinking about hardware, but yeah, I think you're right that they were reducing the value or the importance of the hardware in their business. But now I think how we try to do is, as we said, to simplify, right? To simplify everything. Like that's why we a few years ago we acquired the FreeRTOS, which is the open source operating system for the microcontrollers,
Yeah,
or Greengrass. You know it very well. In
yeah,
December, we announced that this is open source and more modular. So, you can use some modules of Greengrass for your Edge software and take only what you need. So we try to make it easier to our services to work on different, all this variety of hardware. And of course, we count on our partners to build the, first of all, for the consultancy of our partner that our partners provide, but also to build with our partners hardware that is, easier to deploy the AWS IoT services or other things. Yeah, and I think with the edge computing, you're right that we'll see more and more. Everything is coming at the device level, not everything, but the big majority as the years pass. And also that's why for us in AWS we think IoT and edge is super important, because not
yeah.
many things will happen in the cloud, but many will be in the
Right.
factory, the warehouse, at the terminals for oil and gas. Yeah.
Yeah. When prior to me running SI, um, I was at Cisco for 13 years, and my last 3-4 years, it's confession time now. My last 3-4 years, I was actually competing with AWS. I ran the cloud program for Cisco globally, cloud managed services, and you could argue that failed miserably. Not that the goal was to try and stop AWS, but it was actually to try and replicate a lot of what AWS did. But the scale that you guys had was very difficult to replicate. And in the end, it was more of an embrace strategy. But one of the things I always used to say to people when I was explaining why AWS was so effective was that you really did, in my view, at least two things really, really well. It is simplify things, demystify, simplify them. And you did it multiple times. It was releases of software every day. The DevOps model is, the number of new features that were coming every day, solving problems. And then also scale, the ability to really scale in a simple way. And that's relevant in terms of the hardware, because the approach that we've taken working with you mentioned Greengrass, is to actually say, how could you apply the lessons of simplify and scale to the hardware level? And so one of the things that we've done, we have our own routers, and we just released a new one, of course, the Hera 700, which has AWS on there. It's optimized for 5G environments, programmable router. You can program in Python on the cloud and download the application to
Okay.
the edge router. So it makes things simpler. We've also taken the scaling down to the silicon level. And another announcement that we did with you guys was with formerly Gemalto, now Thales,
Yeah.
where actually you have their Intelligent Cloud Connect, which is essentially a module or an edge aggregation device, which contains everything in the silicon. So when you switch the module on or the edge aggregation device on, it actually registers as a thing on the AWS IoT thing repository. The services provision, the security certificate, is generated from within AWS IoT and is stored automatically in the module. And the idea is that it's just two AT commands. It's sort of publish and subscribe, but it's two AT commands to turn the device on, which is a significant for those listeners who know about how difficult it has been to connect devices to hyperscale cloud and to make them secure, register them, and provision the service. It's a significant breakthrough. And then, of course, you get the ability for it to connect to any network globally. So I think we're both on this approach to try and constantly simplify it, because as much of as the progress is good that we've made so far, still the number one feedback we get, at least, is that the one of the biggest inhibitors is the complexity. And we started off talking about that. People still come to me. I still think we've got a way to go, but work in the area of hardware and scalability of the silicon layer, the security side, and then giving people
machine learning,
advice. It means we're making progress. So
and the integration that you mentioned, right? The integration of your connectivity platform with AWS IoT, which makes it much easier to deploy, to use cloud, to secure your devices. I think, and also with the Tails, Gemalto, all of these are great, I think, examples to the right direction. And I think because we are going now to more maturity with IoT, and more and more companies are starting using IoT, I don't think there is so much talent outside, so many experts in the market who are technical IoT experts. So to help traditional companies, build good products, connect good products. So that's why I think this kind of partnerships and the simplicity that we try to bring to the market is a way to scale IoT, right? It's the way to make IoT accessible for more companies, more people.
Well, I'll tell you a story. I challenged our SVP of sales. I won't mention his name on this call. I challenged her. I said, look, if this product is so simple that it will do everything we just talked about, then a child should be able to use it. And he said, well, I've got one of those. I've got a 12-year-old daughter. So we made her the head of our quality testing department for a week. And so we got these boxes from Thales, and she's a 12-year-old at home. I said, well, just take it home and see if your daughter can make it work without any help from you. And to her credit, she did. She had a small issue. She had a small issue, and it was actually due to an error in the documentation. We then fixed that. But kids are amazing. They follow things well, and they're quite happy doing a bit of research. Anyway, she got it to work, so we gave her a certificate as a head of testing. I did threaten to make the sales manager do the same thing live in front of the rest of the management team, but I decided not to put him on that platform. But the serious point being is that when we say things have got to be easy, it can't be a IT definition of easy. I mean, it's sort of like can a 12-year-old do it, and can you truly switch it on, follow some instructions? It's not instant, but follow some instructions, and within a few minutes have it working, and it has to be that easy to get the adoption, and that's something that we're all working on. There are customers out there, of course, who are really doing extremely well. We always try and highlight them in this podcast. And so I've got one in particular I wanted to talk about, but if we go first with yourself, Dimitrios, can you give us perhaps a customer example of somebody who you think have done something fairly innovative? Perhaps you mentioned partners, working with a partner, that maybe you can give a shout out to a customer who's done things well.
Yeah, I would like maybe to mention one customer who has worked with SI as a partner, but also with another partner here in UK. The name is Green Custard. So the customer
Green
name.
Custard, we have to explain. So you said that quickly. Excuse me for jumping in, but some people will say, "What did he say? Did he say custard?" And so it's a company, it's a partner of both of us actually, which are formed by Mr. Green and Mr. Custard.
And Mr. Custard, yeah,
Brilliant insight to actually call the company Green Custard. So anyway, I just wanted to explain that.
Anyway, no need to mention the history of the name, but yeah, you're right, and it's very interesting how they created the name. But so this is like a local system integrator for IoT, and we work very closely. So the customer is Martin Engineering. That they're an American company, and they are providing bulk material handling equipment and services around the world. So they have belt cleaners, conveying belts, blades for a mining industry, for heavy industrial sectors. They provide material handling solutions. So what they wanted to do was to connect their equipment in order to be able to do real-time remote monitoring, to understand, the conditions of their equipment and send alerts to the engineers when the belts are going to, when they are very dirty, or when they need replacement, or when they need to stop the machine, and try to do it proactively, or to schedule the maintenance at the right time instead of stopping the production of their customers, which would cost lots of thousands per hour. And SI was the global connectivity provider. They wanted a global solution, so they came to SI to have this global coverage, to be everywhere connected. And they use AWS IoT services like SiteWise, IoT Core, Device Defender that we mentioned, device management. And our partner, Green Custard, they help them bring everything together and deploy from the US to around the world, using cloud for information and other services. So this is really how a very traditional, company, with how they are trying to connect not just one machine in the local business, but how they are going at scale to connect their industrial assets, which are expensive and they're really valuable for their customers, and how they go in full production and at the global deployments.
It's interesting. Excuse me. It's interesting that the often when I ask the question about to guests on the podcast, can you give a shout out to a customer? It's often the innovative, startups or innovative. And of course the big potential is for the install base of legacy equipment that's out there. And you mentioned, conveyor belts, an industrial company that's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
And the payback of smart enabling legacy equipment, the industrial IoT, or some people call it the interface between IT and OT, information technology and operational technology. That's actually where a lot of the ROI and the payback and the opportunity for IoT is. And if you can actually take classic, almost heavy equipment type scenarios and smart enable it, the opportunity is huge. Not least in which the most common business case we've seen is, and I'm sure it's the case here, is the maintenance process, is the ability to interrogate devices to find out what's wrong before you actually send somebody out there to find out, to confirm that it's wrong, to then go back to get the part that they now know that they need to come back. That represents downtime. And so the ROI for doing that is huge. If you can then do that globally with the same solution, the same SIM, the same connectivity, the same cloud solution, the same security policy, the paybacks are enormous because previously this stuff wasn't possible. I'm going to give a
Even
shout out to,
Nick,
sorry, go on.
just to mention of this, I think the industrial sector is where I think we see the most interest and demand this year, which is very interesting, and especially from the traditional companies that they are starting now their IoT journey. And usually the business case is that if their production stop for 1 hour, they may lose 300K,
Yes,
$300,000 or pounds, whatever, or $500,000 in the mining industry, oil and gas, where it's so the business case is so clear for these companies using IoT,
yes,
which is fascinating.
totally
Yeah,
agree.
but yeah,
Again,
please tell me your favorite example with a
yeah,
customer.
yeah. Well, just on this one, I just want to highlight that again, what you just said, because I think a lot of people have missed that. I'm actually going to give it an example of a startup, but before I do, like you said, what is 1 hour of downtime worth to you or cost you, right? And it can be 10,000, 100,000. It can be half a million. I mean, the oil wellhead, if you can't drill or you have to stop the rig, it can be $1 million. And at that point, you suddenly realize that that's where the opportunity is. But people don't know how to IoT enable legacy products.
I think to measure the value sometimes of
Yeah. And that's what you can do with these edge aggregation devices, because the thing about a conveyor belt, or we have customers that do big industrial boilers, we have 2,000 customers, and I guess most of them are in the legacy product space. But these products all have controllers on them. So they have a small port where you can plug a little cable in, and you can get information out of them. And often engineers use that information just to diagnose it when they're on site. But the fact that you have a controller in the device of some sort, perhaps with an RS-232 interface or something, means you can put an edge aggregation device in with cellular and actually start to do this remotely, and then start to actually do the sort of case studies that we're talking about. So I do believe that IT/OT is almost the forgotten area of IT, and I think of IoT, and I think that's where a lot of the case studies, I totally agree with you. A lot of the big success case studies will be with this huge install base of legacy equipment that's not smart and is about to become smart. So having said all of that, I do want to give a shout out to a company. It's actually a company that has just won an award. They won an award from Juniper Research for the most innovative, I believe the title is the most innovative IoT solution. It's a company called Alcuris, Alcuris. And we talked about areas in which IoT makes a contribution, and this is in the healthcare area. It's a very simple but on paper idea, but one which I think we can all identify with, and it's to do with, again, it's pattern matching. It's another area of pattern matching, but in this case, it's humans and their behavior, and actually elderly relatives. So the idea of, I don't know, let's say your mum is living on her own, and you're worried about her, and the idea of putting little sensors around the house, tiny little things. They could be in the bed, so you can find out whether she's lying on the bed or she's out of bed. They could be on the bathroom door. Has she passed the bathroom door to go to the bathroom of a night? And then by the kettle, has the kettle been switched on? It's a British company, so switch on for a cup of tea. And then the idea is, by putting these sensors around the phone, you very rapidly build up a pattern of predictable behavior. And what you can then say is, well, I'm going to have an alert, which is if mum gets out of bed in the night, goes to the bathroom, but doesn't get back in bed, then alert, obvious one. Or perhaps made a cup of tea, hasn't made a cup of tea, and it's 20 minutes later than normal, maybe I'll call her. So this all goes into the phone. And it's a very simple idea, but the market segment, you talk about the ROI, the market segment is the care home a business where people send carers out into the community. And the idea is that the thing that they're addressing is that often people will get 3 visits in a day from different carers calling in on the same person. And so there are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of carers working for councils whose job it is just to go and check on people. And of course, you don't get the human element, but you can perhaps say, you know what, you should either prioritize who you don't need to check on because they seem to be okay, or the other side of it, no, go back to this person now. They're not due a check, but there's something going on. So it actually is a great thing for the obviously the patients. It's a great thing for the local councils, and this is local councils are loving it because it allows them to optimize care in
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
community. Very simple, and of course for relatives who can get all the information from the phone. It's a very,
Yep.
very simple idea. These sensors are very cheap, they're very small, they're easily to install. And again, it's pattern matching, which comes back to your machine learning thing. And you can imagine in the future, you could really start taking this to many, many more levels once you introduce machine learning into these healthcare environments.
Exactly. And I think like we shouldn't. You mentioned the human element, right? But I think if a council is able to reduce the 3 visits just to which have the purpose just to check if the elder is fine, they can do like 1 visit per day maximum. But this could be like 20 minutes full of
Yes, more
human
time.
interaction, full of
Exactly.
human interaction and love.
Have a discussion with them. Have a
Yeah,
discussion and a chat, which might be they may be the only person they speak to that day. And so the
exactly. Yeah.
idea of all the benefits around mental health and combating loneliness. That's
So
why some of the IoT health studies case studies are quite touching in terms of what IoT does, not from a technology point of view, but what IoT can do to change people's quality of life. And I
exactly.
some of them are quite amazing what they can do. And you're absolutely right. Just spend more time with somebody,
Quality time. Yeah.
quality time. Yeah, for both the patient and the carer, actually. Well, listen, we
Yeah.
could talk for hours, Dimitrios, because I know we've got many, many customers together. But I did want to perhaps bring this together and with one final question and say, I'm sure people have been fascinated by this conversation. If people want more information, is there any source of information or where they could go to get more information about what it is that you guys do?
Yeah. First of all, if this is for something specific, they can reach out to me by LinkedIn, Dimitrios Spiliopoulos IoT or Dimitrios IoT, and they will find me. But also, for sure, they can find many information on the website AWS IoT. If they Google, they will find it. But also, recently, I think this is very important, and especially for existing AWS customers or for companies that are considering to use AWS IoT services. We recently published a well architecture review, which is a very popular document from AWS, but so far it was a general for cloud IT services. But now we published the document, which is well architecture review with IoT lens. So it's focusing only on the IoT and covers security, scalability, reliability, resilience, access control. So all of these things like best practices that someone should follow around the AWS IoT.
So
And yeah, if you check well architecture review IoT lens, you will find it online and it's free to download. And
great.
yeah,
Well architecture review with IoT lens, and they can find that, download it, and it's free. And with a lot of tips and advice in there. So that's great. So let's bring it to conclusion. Thanks again, Dimitrios, for your time and your insight, and indeed your partnership between the two companies. You've been listening to the IoT Leaders podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I certainly did. You can find much more information about the different podcasts on the SI website. That's ESEYE. And you can, of course, access all of the previous episodes and get a lot more information, white papers, case studies, etc., to help you with your IoT journey. If you need to reach me, you can find me on LinkedIn, Nick Earl, or iotleaders@si.com. So Dimitrios, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much. I know you're a busy man, but thank you for spending about 45 minutes with me today for the IoT Leaders podcast.
No, it was a great pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. And I hope the next one to be in person, maybe in a pub or in a cafe.
Well, if we're getting closer, we're almost there. We're
Maybe
getting
at the
closer.
next one,
Yeah, I've got to meet a lot of people I've only seen on video in a short while.